Thank you, Larry, and thanks to all of you for being here. Really appreciate all of your condolences and prayers for my mother, and I'm just going to spend a few minutes here at the beginning of my talk sharing some of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, and my mother's passing away. And I'm thinking possibly at some point of developing a talk about my mother, because I know that there's been such an outpouring of sympathy for her, and she was active for 70 years, politically active for 70 years. So there's this mountain of work that it's going to take me the rest of my life just to sort of sort through it and discover things. And I'll tell you, right, just the next few minutes, some things we've already discovered. But her last few, what's that? No, we're not throwing anything away, and we're talking about digitizing all of it too, so it can get out there on the internet. But she was in good spirits right up to the end. I had a visit with her over a couple-day period at the end of last month, and she was going strong. She still had her wit, and it's her wit and good humor that we're really going to miss in the face of adversity. Her charm in the face of adversity, that was really what was special about her, among other things. And I thought she was going strong, and then after I left, then she started to fade very quickly, just in a few days, and she was not taking any fluids or nutrition, continued to see visitors, and I visited with her by Skype on the last day that she was awake and cognizant. Her mind was good right up until the end. And then she slipped into a coma in the last day and then passed away fairly quickly, I guess, of heart failure. She did have some other issues that were going on. She lived to 92 years old, which was longer than her sister, who tended to be healthier. My mother was not that physically healthy. She overcame a lot of physical problems, but she lived 7 years longer than her sister. And I think it's because my mother was so active and energetic and in good spirits. So one of the things she taught me is it's not enough to fight the good fight. You have to learn to enjoy fighting the good fight. And she'd say, you have to be like the Irish cop who gets into the fights with the bad guys, and then after the fight says, that was fun, let's do that again. And she did, she very much enjoyed the good fight. And another thing she told me, when she grew up, the hero in sports was Babe Ruth. That's how far back we're going. And she once said to me, she said, when you're dealing with questions, and she often got hostile questions from reporters in particular, but sometimes students on college campuses and stuff, you have to be like Babe Ruth. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? What do you mean like Babe Ruth? And she said, all those home runs that Babe Ruth hit, they were all on bad pitches. They never threw Babe Ruth a strike. He learned to hit home runs on bad pitches. So you get these hostile questions, and you got to learn to then hit the ball where you want it to go, which is what she learned how to do. And she got to the point where she confided with me, and she said when she goes on college campuses, she did a number of college tours, over 500 in the 70s and the 80s, all very hostile, big audiences, 500, 600 people. And she said it got to where if someone asked her a friendly question from the audience, it would throw her off. That she much preferred the hostile question because she was so much more used to hitting those than when someone asked her a friendly question. So they played a clip last week as part of the memorial, and it was an interview where Tom Brokaw was interviewing her, I guess, on the Today Show like 40, 50 years ago. And Tom Brokaw's giving her a hard time, and she's just dishing it right back to him. And they're talking about the military and the draft and drafting women into the military. It's towards the end of the Vietnam War, I guess, and I don't know if the draft was still in place or selective service. And then Tom Brokaw says, well, listen, there are exemptions for some of these issues you're talking about, and if a woman gets drafted and whatever, they make exemptions and stuff. And then Tom Brokaw volunteers. He goes, for example, I had the exemption from service because I have flat feet. And my mother just stuck it to him, and she said, flat feet has not been a valid exemption from the draft for a long time. and she would do that to him, and as a result, she got blackballed from some shows. McNeil Lehrer, after she stuck it to McNeil Lehrer on one of their interviews, they told her right in the studio, they said, "We are never going to have you on our show again." Because she would do it, and she had no regrets about doing it either. I mean, she's that. My favorite story was when she got her honorary degree at Washington University 6 or 7 years ago, and the liberal faculty organized a protest and got the students, about half the students, or some say it wasn't really half, it was just a small group, to stand up and turn their back in protest while they were giving my mother the honorary degree. And the pictures are there, my mother's smiling, and she comes out and a reporter tries to get her goat and says, "Boy, what'd you think of the way they turned their backs on you to protest you while you were getting the honorary degree?" And she pauses for a second and she said, "I'm not sure the students are mature enough to graduate." Anyway, we had the funeral, and lo and behold, it was announced, and funeral services and stuff, set the date. We get a call from Donald Trump. Donald Trump said he wanted to fly out to St. Louis to be at the funeral and pay his respects. And it was not a political stunt. It was not something that really got Donald Trump any political gain. He just wanted to do it. He wanted to fly out, and he flew out with his wife and his top campaign staff, and they were there, and then we invited him to give a eulogy in front of the audience, and we moved it all to a bigger church in case there would be a big crowd, and we kept it quiet for a while, and we didn't let it out, didn't break the news until really just about 12 hours before the funeral that Donald Trump was going to be there, and it just filled the cathedral, 2,000 people, and then I had the honor of introducing Donald Trump. This was, I guess, about less than 2 weeks ago. And it's a church, it's a funeral, and I'm thinking, I'm not really going to try to generate an applause or anything. I'm just going to thank him for coming here. And I did say a little joke where I said in front of this audience, and it was broadcast live over CNN, and I said, "Donald Trump, you had the honor of Hillary Clinton attending your wedding, but Phyllis Schlafly has a greater honor of Donald Trump speaking at her funeral." And then I turned and I said, "Thank you, Donald Trump, for coming." And he walks out to the podium, and the entire church erupted in a standing ovation. I was just taken aback by the whole thing. And he then gave his tribute to my mother and seemed to have written it himself. I mean, it sounded like Donald Trump, the way he would say things, and praised her for being a tough woman and for having vision on some of these issues and so on. And then he introduced his wife, and then he walked off and he flew back to New York. And Richard.
Is he orange in real life?
He looked just like he looks on TV. I mean, he just, he didn't seem larger than life. He just seemed like an ordinary guy. I don't know. But that was nice. He came out and gave that tribute, and then the next day, I mean, you do the right thing, and then right things happen, and lo and behold, the next day, this big story broke about Hillary Clinton's health. And it was the very next day she collapsed at the 9/11 event, and you saw that some citizen film of how she collapsed, and she went limp and everything. And that story of Hillary Clinton's health, by the way, that was broken by AAPS a couple weeks earlier. And so Jane Orient gets a lot of credit for raising that issue of Hillary Clinton's health. And we took a lot of heat for that. We took a lot of heat for that, for starting to raise the question of Hillary Clinton's health, and then lo and behold, it's a big issue now. It's a huge issue. And the alt-right is jumping on this. Now that's another thing I just want to mention here briefly. We need to realize what the alt-right is. That stands for alternative right. And that refers to websites like Breitbart. Now, Breitbart's top guy was Stephen Bannon, and he is now one of the top guys on the Trump campaign. And so Trump is really being fueled by the alt-right. And the alt-right has a style that's different from sort of certainly different from the mainstream media, but it's also different from sort of traditional conservative and libertarian outlets. Alt-right, they don't play by the rules. I mean, they're impatient. They're not part of the establishment. They will go after this health issue, for example. They go right after the health issue, whereas other websites like, oh, we can't talk about that, that's out of bounds, et cetera, et cetera. No, Breitbart, the Gateway Pundit in St. Louis is another one, and this new type of media, and they're saying if Trump wins, they're going to say the alt-right is going to take over the whole sort of right side of the political spectrum, and the traditional conservative and libertarian outlets are going to be sort of dismissed as too mainstream, too fuddy-duddy, you know, too old-fashioned. Okay, moving on to MOC. And we just had this presentation by Governor Mary Fallin, and she seemed to know all about it. Oklahoma signed a good bill into law where it says MOC, which is maintenance of certification, shall not be required based on any Oklahoma state law, that no statute in Oklahoma shall be construed to require MOC. That's a great first step, but we're going to go further than that. And with the legislative cycle starting pretty soon in most states, and AAPS is active at the state level, unlike other organizations that are 501c3 that don't get involved in legislation, we do get involved in legislation. We're not 501c3. We have a legal arm that's 501c3. But AAPS itself is categorized under IRS section 501c6, which means we can be active in legislation, and we are. And we're pushing for states to prohibit hospitals and insurance companies from requiring MOC. And so wherever state you're from, think about that and think about how we can start to draft those bills and get them in the hands of state legislators so that they can pre-file them in November and December and get those bills pushed so that we can go beyond what we've already done. And we've got some good bills passed in Michigan, Missouri, Kentucky, and Oklahoma. Let's go one step further and just prohibit hospitals or insurance plans from requiring MOC as a condition of being in the hospital or being in the plan. Now, hospitals are not supposed to require it anyway, because the JCAHO standard says you're not supposed to use certification as the sole criterion for having someone on your medical staff. So hospitals really shouldn't be required. We've got a physician here who's put it in the medical staff bylaws of the hospital. You can do that too. You can get it in your bylaws that no, MOC is not required here. We've got a battle with the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, where there's a deadline of, I guess it's tomorrow, for comments to object to any requirement that MOC be a part of the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. So we're going to put in comments on that to get MOC out. We've got a number of lawsuits going on this, and the one I'm spending the most time on right now is where the ABIM is suing a young physician supposedly for copyright infringement. And we've been having depositions, and basically the ABIM is a bully. And they're one of the worst specialty societies in the way that they impose these certification exams and maintenance certification and so on. And they're the ones that rated Aurora board review and got the computer and then went after 50 doctors who had taken the test prep course and then required these doctors to pay ABIM money and so on in order to get their certification. And there's one doctor who's refused to do that, and we're in litigation and we're going to expose a lot of the bad stuff that the ABIM has done. I mean, there's no evidence that these maintenance of certification exams are linked to quality, are linked to how good the physician is, are linked to fewer malpractice claims or whatever. There's no evidence of any link to quality. And so it shouldn't be required. It's a distraction. It's a waste of time. But to show you the ABIM's tactics and what a bully they are, we deposed their security guy. They had got some guy full-time on security issues. And he would fly around and he would interrogate people to try to see if any ABIM exam questions were being leaked if anyone was taking the exam and then telling questions to other people and so on. And so we find out that this guy has a shady past. And in fact, we got a newspaper article that talks about his shady past. So after the deposition, when we asked him questions about this, and he wasn't very happy about it, that's for sure, and his attorneys were very unhappy about our uncovering the shady past of the ABIM's top security officer. ABIM has tried to assert that a newspaper article that we used in the deposition needs to be concealed as confidential. That we cannot get that out, the newspaper article about this guy, and that's got to be stamped confidential. That's how they're behaving in litigation. But we are going to get the word out, and you're going to hear some excellent presentations later this afternoon on this same issue. We've got a terrific blogger here who's been getting the message out, and you'll hear from him. All right, moving on here. Sham peer review. Illinois Supreme Court issued a ruling in a case in which we filed an amicus brief, the Valfer case, where the Illinois Supreme Court recognized the problem of sham peer review and recognized our amicus brief. And that's a good step forward. So we're past the day when people would look at us and say sham peer review is something invented by AAPS. It doesn't really exist. We're past that now. People know that it exists. The Illinois Supreme Court has officially recognized it. It is a problem, and now it's just a matter of how to deal with it. Hospitals are still engaging in bad faith peer review. You still have to keep an eye out for that. You have to know your medical staff bylaws. You got to be prepared to fight these things. We know now how to use the assistance of the court system to compel attendance by witnesses at your sham peer review proceeding. Because a hospital started to develop a tactic where they would say, oh, sure, you can cross-examine witnesses, we're just not going to provide any witnesses for you to cross-examine. No, you can go into court and you can get a court to compel attendance at your sham peer review hearing by any physician who has information that's relevant to what they're doing. So that's a step in the right direction. Now I want to diverge a little bit into the topic of private property, and we'll have time for questions and answers. I've had a number of discussions with people, conservatives, libertarians, and so on, that, and I include myself in this too, that we don't really fully appreciate the power of private property. And if you think that someone can come into your home without your permission, if you hesitate for a moment before telling an investigator that he has no right to come into your home, then you need to spend a little time re-educating yourself and your family members and your staff at how powerful private property is. Private property, you have the right, the owner of private property has the right to exclude anybody at any time for any reason. You don't have to be nervous about it. You don't have to, be afraid to do it. If you invite somebody into your home and you invite them in, you welcome them in, they say something that's rude, you can throw them out at any time. I mean, because you own the private property. And more importantly, that's true for your office. You own your office. Now, if you're leasing it, you own it. You still own the space. Whether you own the property or you lease the space, that is your castle, your office. And so if there's anybody you don't want to be there, even if you've allowed them in before, you can tell them to leave. And if they don't leave, you say, I'm going to call the police if you don't leave. And if they still don't leave, you call the police, and the police comes out and escorts them out of your office. Keep that in mind. People forget that, and let your staff know that. You don't have to answer questions. Investigator shows up and just says, oh, buddy, just here to ask you a few questions. You don't have to answer any questions. The better response in those situations, unless you're absolutely sure that they're not suspecting you of anything, the better response is, great, I'll be happy to answer your questions. put them down in writing and email them to me, okay? Just email me your questions. I'll get back to you. It's not the best time. I've got some work to do here. Send me your questions and I'll respond to you, or I'll send them to my attorney or whatever. Tell your staff that. Let everybody know that. You don't have to be pushed around by anyone in your own office. Now, this has become an issue in Texas. Texas, a number of surprise visits to doctors' offices. And if they don't have a search warrant, and often they don't, then you say, give me your papers, I'll show them to my attorney. I may contest in court these subpoenas that you give to me, which you have a right to do, contest them in court. Someone has a search warrant, then it's a different story. But even if they have a search warrant, you got to look at what the search warrant says and make sure you limit them to what the search warrant requires. If the search warrant says they're allowed to look in this room of your house or your office, you limit them to that. They're not allowed to look in other rooms or go through other files. So it's always good to have a little refresher, a little reminder of the power of private property. All courts recognize this. All police departments recognize this. And this has created a bit of a stir in Texas because sometimes government officials do not recognize this. And so it's important to remind them of that. The first thing you ask them, do you have a search warrant? If they don't have a search warrant, then tell them to wait till you get your attorney, tell them to come back another time, tell them to put their questions in writing, whatever, because you're the owner of the private property. Okay, let me talk about some of the new actions that we're embarking on before we get into questions here. We have our board meeting. We're going to have another board meeting Saturday afternoon. You're welcome to attend that, and that's when we consider new actions. And we've got Obamacare still on its last legs, right? Market conditions are, I think, bringing Obamacare to its demise. And there is one more lawsuit that's pending on Obamacare that we're going to get involved in, and that's where the House of Representatives sued the Obama administration in protest of the subsidies that the Obama administration has been given to insurance companies to prop up those exchanges. And those subsidies are not authorized by the statute. So the House of Representatives sued to stop those subsidies, and the district court judge in DC held in favor of the House of Representatives and said the Obama administration should not be spending this money because Congress did not authorize it. That has gone up on appeal now before the DC Court of Appeals, and we're going to come in with an amicus brief to shut those subsidies off, and if we're able to shut those subsidies off, then that's the end of the exchanges. And so that'll be nice. Another action that we're going to be doing is to challenge these regulations under MACRA. And MACRA is this monstrosity, as you know, that is a terrible idea. AAPS opposed it all along. Many of the other medical societies support it, but now they see how bad it's becoming. And these regulations basically give the government all this access to medical records, and they discriminate against the small practitioner, which is what AAPS really represents. The solo and small group practices, and MACRA discriminates against them with their reimbursement rates and so on. So we commented in objection to the proposed regulations that are going to discriminate against small practitioners, and then we're going to sue to challenge them if the rules come out the way that they propose. Now, maybe they'll change the rules, maybe they'll delay it, I don't know. But if the proposed rules come out the way they propose, we're going to be in court challenging those. And then the other thing I want to mention that we'll probably challenge are how Medicare is starting to try to tie reimbursements to compliance with guidelines. And this is an alarming trend where Medicare focusing on antibiotics and trying to reduce the use of antibiotics are saying, look, if you don't comply with guidelines on antibiotics, then they're going to reduce reimbursement rates for hospitals and for physicians. We do not think that private medical groups that are basically under the influence of insurance companies should be dictating the practice of medicine. I mean, if there's Congress has broad power under the spending clause, but Congress is accountable to the public. I mean, we can vote them out of office in theory, in theory, right? They hold hearings. They have to have offices to take our phone calls and our emails and stuff. We can have protests against them, but these private societies, there's none of that. There's no accountability. There's no transparency. We don't even know who's writing these guidelines. We don't know who's having influence behind closed doors. And they should not have this way to dictate the practice of medicine by having these guidelines get bootstrapped into Medicare reimbursement rates. So this is an alarming trend, and we're there to stop it. And then finally, a bit of particularly good news before we go to the questions and answers. And I don't know that everybody in this room will appreciate this, but we sued the Texas Medical Board, hold on, back in probably about 9 years ago. We sued them, and we fought that lawsuit for many years. 2006 or 2007, I'm not sure. 2007, I think, wasn't it? Okay. Oh, it did. Yes, it did. Starting time, but we filed suit in 2007. Okay. And we identified 6 problems, 6 individuals who were problems on the Texas Medical Board. And the Texas Medical Board at the time was just running roughshod over the practice of medicine. I know we have some people here from Texas today. And even those who are not from Texas realize the Texas Medical Board was sort of the leader in abusing physicians. The Federation of State Medical Boards comes out of Texas. So not only was Texas Medical Board the worst, but it was also just kind of the leader too. So we had to stop them. And we sued them, stopped them, we fought that litigation, went on. Okay, we identified 6 problems on the board, 6 individuals. In the course of our litigation, 5 of them left. Okay? So as we exposed what they were doing and so on, 1 remained on the Texas Medical Board. And some of you in the audience know who that is. Her name is Mary Robinson. And she stayed, she hung on, and she continued to fight. And we had a legislative hearing on some reform of Texas Medical Board. It would have been the last time Texas was in session, so it would have been last year. And I testified on a bill. And being the friendly person I am, I went up to Mary and said, Mary, how are you doing? And she refused to shake my hand. So she was determined to, and she's kept at it, not with as much power as she had before we sued, though. But she kept at it and she kept at it. Well, just an hour ago, I learned that Mary Robinson has resigned as executive director of Texas Medical Board. So this is AAPS, we're in for the long haul, right? Founded in 1943. One of the problems in fighting hospitals, insurance companies, government and stuff is these institutions will wear down the individual doctor. They'll just wear you down. They'll wear, even when you win, it's like you feel like you lost because they just wear you down. Government just, it's the old saying, you can't fight City Hall, right? Because City Hall will just wear you down, wear you down, wear you down. But as part of AAPS, where we're here for 73 years, and we'll be here for another 73, they're not going to wear us down. And we will outlast them. We will wear them down. Thank you very much.
When you look at a lot of the bylaws in terms of the certification, board certification, they'll just have a lot of times generic language that just says board certification. It doesn't say the American Board of Medical Specialists.
Right.
So I was board certified in internal medicine, then certified in GI, and then recertified. And I decided last year I just had enough of it because it was going to cost me upwards of about $50,000 to go through the whole process. And so I went with the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. I made it through one certification of surgery, recertification of surgery center. But are we basically okay? And if it does not say the American Board of Medical Specialties, do we have a leg to stand on in terms of going with somebody like the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons?
That's an excellent question. It varies from state to state and hospital to hospital. So the question is whether certifying organizations other than the American Board of Medical Specialties groups, that umbrella of 24 groups, which includes ABIM, whether we can go outside that and get certified by some of these other certifying groups. And the answer is yes in many cases, but not every case. So in some states, there are laws against saying you're board certified if it's not with an American Board of Medical Specialties group. We need to change those laws. And some hospitals will only recognize an American Board of Medical Specialties certification. We need to change that at those hospitals. If it just says certification, you got a strong argument that you should be able to be certified by a competitive group. And a lot of hospitals increasingly are accepting certification by competitors, and I think that's great. We applaud that at AAPS.
Yeah. Hi, I have a couple questions. One, on the state level, we see now the governors and Republican governors and legislators are saying, hey, this is a good thing to fight the federal government. So what can we do more on the state level, such as state laws that say it's a crime to interfere with someone's ability to make a living? And there's other laws, state laws, about it's illegal to practice medicine without a medical license. And that's what Washington is doing.
Right.
And then my second question is, what you said about the board certification. The government has created this problem, though, running doctors out of business and then helping people, supposedly, all of these federally funded clinics, rural clinics, hospitals, rural hospitals, you must be board certified. There's a check box. And everything's on a checkbox now. Either you're board eligible or you're board certified. There's nothing about, you didn't do the mock, so they expired your certification. When the credentialing goes online to American Board of Pediatrics, they say you're not certified, even though you were, once it expires.
Once it expires, because then they'll post on their website that'll say you're not certified. And they'll look you up on their website. So we're challenging that, and we consider that defamation, what some of these board certifying groups are putting on their website and claiming that you're not certified when you were. So one way to fight back against that is defamation. So let's talk afterwards if you want to pursue that. Yeah. Next question.
It seems that the main problem with maintenance of certification is the fact that we've granted these sort of semi-governmental institutions the power to dictate how much money they can draw out of our wallets. What about having a legislative goal of eliminating the requirement for board certification for anything?
I think you'd find that the view is divided about that, about eliminating all certification. The view would be divided in this room about that. I think some would agree with you, but then others would say the initial certification, like getting your MD degree, your DO degree, has some value to it, but it should be for life. So that's a good proposal. We've discussed that at our board meetings. You're welcome to come to some of them. But a lot of physicians in this room feel the initial certification has some value to it, like an MD degree. But it shouldn't be something you have to renew. I mean, you don't have to renew your MD degree, your DO degree, right? You don't have to renew your high school diploma, right? I understand. It's a good point.
My concern is with the alleged opiate problems, that they're using physician monitoring programs to discipline doctors because they write for legitimate uses of opiates, because someone will always be more than the next person. And just, I don't know if anyone else has a concern, but I sure do.
It is a problem, those panels that they use to bully doctors with. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to shed a little light on the question about being board certified initially. Recognize that AAPS through ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, was able to get model legislation passed that actually is worded in such a way that initial specialty board certification would not be necessary. So the way that's worded is ideal for us in that sense that we don't even, many of us don't even want to see discrimination based upon initial board certification, although we think it's a good idea. We think initial board certification is something that all of us should strive for, but they shouldn't use it as a method in which they can terminate some of our careers. And so if you live in any state, go to your conservative legislator and see if that legislator will go to the ALEC website and take their model legislation. And your conservative legislator may be a member of ALEC. And so get this legislation started, encourage your legislators to start it, because it's already there as a model legislation at ALEC.
Very good.
Hi, Rick Edgerly, Washington State Family Practice. Has anybody raised the issue on the fact that now when I write a narcotics prescription, I'm required by the American Board of Pharmacy to do an ICD-10? So now I feel like I'm leaving patient confidentiality in the hands of the pharmacist. Is that happening everywhere else? It's happening in our state, I know.
It's you're required to write an ICD-10.
Right. If I write for, let's say, an antibiotic, it just goes through. But if I write for a narcotic, I have to have an ICD-10 attached to that, so they know why that patient's receiving the narcotic.
Yeah, they're doing that to build a database, right? They're doing that to track you.
I think so. I'm in Washington, but they said it's the National Board of Pharmacy that's requiring that.
That's the first I've heard of that, but they're doing it to track you.
What's an amicus brief?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Amicus is Latin for friend. The full name is amicus curiae, which is friend of the court. So an amicus brief is a brief that's filed with a court by a party that's independent to the litigation. So the parties in the case file their briefs back and forth, plaintiff, defendant, appellant, appellee. An amicus brief is a brief that's filed by someone who's not in the litigation as kind of a bystander. So we're sort of an objective bystander, and we see a case going on there, and we file an amicus brief to say, Your Honor, we're watching what's going on here, and this is the way you should really hold in this case. And they can be very effective because we have some objectivity and independence. We're not just saying it because we're the plaintiff or the defendant. We're saying it because we're a 73-year-old organization that has seen these issues, and we think the court should rule in a certain way. Thank you for that question.
Andy. Andy, I'm glad you're an amicus of the doctor. Thank you very much. I have a Florida on MOC legislation. I have a Florida state legislator who's an AAPS member and a doctor. And I said, hey, look what they did in Oklahoma. Why do you sponsor this bill here? And of course, he's a freshman guy. He's like, oh, well, what he's really thinking is, oh, the leadership doesn't want that. But the excuse he uses, well, I haven't seen any evidence that it's a problem here in Florida yet, in our state. So no one's proposing that this be required at our Board of Medicine, which I'm still not able to verify. So let me know when they try to do this, and then I'll do it. How do you handle that, and can you help us find the problems?
Well, yeah, I think then you get the word out to doctors to contact that legislator and bury him with emails and phone calls about how much time it's wasting to have to jump through these MOC hoops. I mean, it's just a tremendous waste of time and money. And they fail people too, as you know. In this, it's not mandated by the medical board. Now, South Carolina has started to ask. So, and other medical boards may be asking, but they don't require. So they'll ask, have you kept your MOC current? If not, why not? And you have to explain. So they're starting to kind of intimidate you that way. Paul, do you want to address that? But Paul's going to say something about this.
Paid. You're going broke already, but now you're not going to get paid. Or how many hospitals in Florida require it? Well, we don't want doctors in Florida, apparently, and we're going to hire nurse practitioners to do your job, and they don't have certification. It's the race to the bottom.
Okay. Thank you very much.